An ancient Egyptian princess has been trapped in a death coffin for millennia. Her entire body is marked with mysterious symbols. She is chained and immobile. A metallic liquid constantly flows through her veins. It's mercury, which according to legend can prevent demons from using their magic. For if she breaks free from the coffin, she could cause a catastrophe. She could summon a sandstorm with a gesture. She could destroy the world with a blink of an eye. Her name is Ahmanet. 5,000 years ago, she was a beautiful princess and the successor to the throne of Egypt. She would have been the supreme queen. But everything changed when her father had a son with another woman. This boy would be the new heir to the throne. Ahmanet did not accept this situation. She used her blood to summon Seth, the god of death. She was willing to sacrifice everything to fulfill her dream. Seth gave her great power in exchange. Black magic soon took over her entire body. Since then, Ahmanet became a servant of the god of death. She showed no mercy to anyone. She killed her father and brother without hesitation. Now she only needed to kill the man in front of her. The god of death could be reborn in him. But just as she was about to attack, the pharaoh's soldiers finally appeared. They used poisoned needles to paralyze Ahmanet, preventing her from using her powers. The princess was then condemned to the worst of punishments. Her body was mummified. Her body was then locked in a death coffin forever. Long ago, a sarcophagus was banished to a place far from Egypt. It was buried in a deep abyss, where it would remain in darkness forever. Hey, the movie I'm going to summarize is called The Mummy. If you're a fan of the saga, or even like adventure movies mixed with suspense, I recommend you stay until the end. But first, subscribe and leave a like to continue receiving summaries like this. 5,000 years later, a missile hit a village in Iraq, and unintentionally, the tomb that imprisoned the princess was destroyed. Military authorities quickly isolated the area. Jenny, an archaeologist, was called to investigate. She was accompanied by Nick and Vale's special government agents. The trio quickly entered the tomb. Inside was an enormous underground space. As soon as they stepped on the ground, they saw mercury running everywhere. In ancient Egyptian mythology, mercury could diminish the power of demons. When they approached the tomb, they were shocked by what they saw. There was a deep well full of mercury. Around it were many protective statues, but they were facing inward, not outward. This means they served to seal, not to guard. And from the bottom of the well, 3 chains emerged. They served to bind the demon in the well. With these clues, Jenny quickly deduced this wasn't a tomb, but an ancient Egyptian prison to confine the demon. At that moment, Nick found the switch to release the chains. When he shot to break the chains, the gears began to move quickly. The coffin that was submerged in the water was also slowly raised. When they saw the drawing on the surface of the coffin, the 3 felt a chill. They knew they had released an evil force into the world. While observing, Nick had a vision. In the middle of the desert, a graceful figure walked slowly towards him. As she approached, the woman's face became clearer. She was beautiful, with hair as black as night and eyes as green as emeralds. She smiled at Nick and approached to kiss him. Jenny woke him up just in time. It was at that moment that a large number of spiders suddenly emerged from the cave. Vale was accidentally bitten by one of them. He took his gun and fired non-stop, but the bullets did almost nothing. The 3 quickly prepared to leave. The army used a helicopter to remove the stone that covered the tomb's entrance. And with the coffin out of place, a huge flock of ravens suddenly gathered outside. The crowd didn't care about these bizarre events. They placed the coffin on the plane and prepared to take it back to the base for more research. But as soon as the plane took off, the weather was good and sunny, but suddenly, a sandstorm formed. On the plane, Vale approached the coffin. He used the knife in his hand to start cutting the strap that held it. When his colleagues went to see what was happening, he stabbed one of them directly. That's when the group realized that Vale was out of his mind. He continued advancing with the knife, not responding to anyone's calls around him. Seeing that they were going to get hurt, Nick had no choice but to pull the trigger. While the group was in shock, the plane suddenly began to shake violently. A raven hit the windshield directly. When everyone looked up, there were more ravens in front of them. The ravens crashed against the front windshield, and with the pilot's death, the plane immediately lost control and started falling rapidly towards the ground. At the decisive moment, Nick gave the only parachute to Jenny, and he fell with the plane. When the search and rescue team arrived, there were no survivors at the site, and the transport coffin was open. Someone soon found the mummy wrapped in cloths. When they were about to approach to see, the mummy jumped on them immediately. It could suck the life out of humans directly. As the man transformed into a dried-up corpse, the mummy began to gain flesh and blood again. And while another man screamed, the man who had just died also rose again. At that moment in the morgue, Nick, who had been confirmed dead, rose again. When he turned around, Vale, who had also died, appeared behind him. He explained that, after being bitten by a spider, his body had been cursed by Princess Ahmanet. And Vale told Nick he was also a target, chosen by the gods of death. Nick couldn't believe it. He had no injuries on his body and had no chance of survival. Jenny entered the place to identify the body, and when she saw Nick, the two went to a bar. Nick was confused about his current state. He couldn't understand how he was still alive. At that moment, Jenny revealed her archaeological discoveries. In ancient Egyptian history, a princess was erased from historical records. Legend says she had a dagger of Set. The stone placed in it was the Eye of Death. When the stone and the dagger come together, they can bring the god of death back to Earth. The coffin they unearthed this time was sealed with the mummy of Princess Ahmanet. The dagger of Set was also taken back to Europe during the invasion. People separated the stone from the dagger. The Eye of Death was buried in the ground with a bishop, and the location of the dagger is still unknown. Now that Princess Ahmanet has broken the seal, she will surely reunite the dagger of Set. While they were talking, Nick saw Vale waving at him again. At first he thought it was a hallucination, until Vale appeared directly from the mirror. Nick believed that Vale wasn't lying to him. He told Nick, now they are both cursed, and Nick is the chosen one by the gods of death. When Ahmanet kills him with the complete dagger of Set, then death will use him to reappear on Earth. The unexpected news left Nick in shock. He was almost calming down when a mummy appeared before him. It brought with it a horde of rats. They soon surrounded Nick's body and began to devour him while the mummies approached. At that instant, a ray of light made Nick wake up. It was all a hallucination. The sequence of strange events made him panic completely. He took Jenny to an abandoned monastery according to the image that suddenly appeared in his mind. In the darkness, they lost each other. Nick was looking for her when the church door slowly opened. The princess had regained her beauty. Nick was hypnotized by her, but he was soon grabbed by several mummies. Ahmanet jumped on him. After confirming that Nick was the chosen one by the god of death, she broke the angel statue that was there. Hidden inside it was the long-lost blade of Seth. She was about to plunge the dagger into Nick's body, but Ahmanet stopped at the last second. She noticed that the Eye of Death on the dagger was missing. When the princess became furious, Jenny also arrived at the scene. The princess attacked. Jenny was thrown away forcefully. Nick also managed to break free from the mummy's control. When the princess was about to kill Jenny, Nick took the dagger and stabbed the princess's body. The two fled the church. They got in the car and drove off, but soon a mummy caught up with them. In the fight, the car also ended up going off the road. The two fell down the hill together. When Nick was going to help Jenny, the princess emerged from the mist once again. Nick saw the situation and grabbed a piece of wood and advanced. But soon he was knocked down by a blow. When the princess was about to kill Jenny first, a sharp arrow pierced her body. Then more iron hooks firmly restrained her. It was Jenny's research organization that had found the location. Ahmanet was then taken back to the base. The base leader also told Nick not to let Ahmanet summon the Reaper, because if the Reaper took over Nick's body, then the whole world would be devastated. Looking at Princess Ahmanet, who was completely imprisoned, Nick walked slowly towards her, and as they looked at each other, Nick fell into a vision again. He was the chosen one by the god of death in his past life. Ahmanet continued to tempt Nick with the illusion. If he could summon the god of death, Seth, Nick would not only have dominion over life and death, but would also make the princess his wife. When Nick was almost drowning, the princess's scream made him wake up from the illusion. The doctor realized something was wrong and increased the dose of mercury in Ahmanet's blood. The princess, frustrated with another failure, had eyes full of hatred. Meanwhile, another group of archaeologists was exploring the Crusaders' tomb. When they opened the sarcophagus, they came across a red jewel. The princess sensed its presence from afar. It was the lost Eye of Death. Then the princess began to chant an incantation. A sacred scarab slowly emerged. It entered the ear of one of the archaeologists. Soon after, the man's eyes turned white. He first disconnected the princess's mercury needle and then grabbed an axe and left. He cut off the laboratory's power supply. The princess's power began to restore. She first expelled all the mercury from her body. Then she prepared to break free from the chains. The guards tried to stop her at that moment, but they were no match for her and were quickly transformed into mummies by the princess. The princess, who had regained all her strength, initiated another incantation. She called the yellow sand to bring Nick back to her. A sandstorm formed and covered the city, and everyone ran for safety. But the sand was everywhere, and they had no way to escape. Nick was hopeless, but Vale returned. He reveals to Nick that, to end this, he must destroy the Death Stone. He guides Nick to the tomb where the stone is hidden. But they didn't count on Ahmanet also having arrived there. At that moment, the tomb went on alert. But with the princess's call, she awakened the dryad that had been asleep for 1,000 years. The guards were soon attacked. She eliminated all the guards without difficulty. When Ahmanet entered the tomb, all the dryads knelt. She also recovered the Gem of Death. The Dagger of Seth was finally complete. On the other hand, Nick and Jenny faced constant attacks from mummies on their way here. Although Nick could deal with them easily, the number of enemies was infinite. They could only flee through the corridor. Soon, they were thrown into the water by a surprise attack. When they tried to emerge, the princess came after them. Jenny was dragged into the water by her. Nick could only see the two disappear from sight, and mummies appearing in the water one after another. They were chasing Nick. He had no choice but to emerge again. He didn't realize that the mummies were waiting for him there. And at that moment, Nick also realized that Jenny had died by his side. Just when Nick was furious, the princess also reappeared. All the mummies turned to ashes and dispersed. She will continue the ritual, interrupted 5,000 years ago. At that moment, Nick was still trying to resist, but the princess threw him to the ground with a single blow. However, the princess also realized that her Dagger of Seth had disappeared from her hand. It turns out Nick had taken the chance to grab the dagger. He immediately smashed the Gem of Death on the ground with all his strength. If this stone was broken, then all curses would disappear. However, at that moment, the princess told Nick if he could master the power of death, then he could revive Jenny. Nick bravely plunged the dagger into his body. Immediately, evil forces began to invade. The spirit of death also began to descend upon his body. When Nick opened his eyes again, his eyes now had 2 pupils. But the princess looked at the figure slowly approaching, but didn't feel the breath of death. It turns out that Nick, with his belief in justice, had successfully overcome the will of death. The princess was still thinking about awakening death, but she herself was easily repelled. He didn't hesitate to recover the princess's immortal body. Then Nick used the power of death again to revive Jenny. But he knew he was no longer a normal human being. Nick finally chose to leave alone. At the end of the movie, the princess was again placed in a sarcophagus and sealed. And Nick also used the power of death to resurrect the good brother Vale. They will continue their journey together to find a way to break the curse. Only by becoming human again can he return to find the one he loves most. Hey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive the best recaps.